Good evening, everybody. Hi, I'm John Fontillis. I'm sitting in for our land use chair tonight. Diana Gonzalez is our regularly scheduled chair, temporary for the evening. We are meeting as a group of 3 committees tonight, land use, landmarks, which is the committee that actually will be required to take a vote on this proposal that we're going to talk about tonight. The agenda being the City of Yes for Economic Opportunity proposal, the second of 3 zoning proposals that are winding their way through all the community boards in the city. We also will have economic development and transportation tonight as well. John DeLuper, Katie Walsh. Am I missing anybody? But as I've been advised tonight, land use is the only one that can vote tonight. I hate to say that, John and Katie, and Sam. But the rules of quorum will demand that the only land use members will be able to vote the proposal out of committee. Now, the question is, will we reach quorum tonight for land use? So put out those good vibes to the other, 10 people on the list. Hopefully they can arrive tonight before we, before we have the a recap of the presentation, as you all know, we actually had this presentation in December. We didn't reach quorum that night as well, but we felt it was important because the zoning proposals, there are 18 of them in this application, do touch on quite a bit of economic development issues, transportation issues, as well as land use issues. So we wanted to make sure that we had another opportunity for the board to review the proposal. Also, I think across the city, DCP did delay the deadline for input on the application to right before city planning votes on it, which is early February. So we do have a chance here to review it as committee and then forward that recommendation to the full board, which meets next week, Wednesday night. So if we don't vote it out of committee tonight, we will obviously have a review during the full board meeting next week. Those are some of the ground rules. I did want to take a few minutes before we get into City of Yes, just to address, I know some of you here are perhaps here for the Windsor Terrace zoning applications that are going through. I apologize, I have a cold, so that's why I'm sitting very far away from Jeremy, this wall of air. We have not received yet the official application, both for the Arrow site nor 44 Sealy. So I did want to take a few minutes to say that, we are anxiously waiting for that to come across. And as soon as those applications come through, we will alert the board and then put it out through our social media that there's something coming up, invite you back for a specific meeting on any or all those sites. But I did want to mention that because the agenda tonight is for City of Yes. We are aware that there are other things that are going on the community board. But without an actual proposal, we're kind of at a loss because we can't really address it officially. So we're waiting for that to come through. Let me just say, lastly, if that does come through, those will be zoning applications, quite possibly a change in zoning. So that would initiate the uniform land use review procedure, which, as you know, the community board does get first dibs at reviewing that as part of the multi-agency review. So our hope is that when we get that proposal, we will broadcast that, and then you will all have some time to review it, come back to the board, provide your testimony, and we will pass that on to the full board and then to the borough president's office. I'll take a couple questions on that if you'd like. Yes, sir. Oh, I'm sorry. We are recording this for, if you don't mind, just give us a second.
Second.
Thank you.
Hi. So in good faith, do you have the capacity to reach out to the Arrow Linen ownership and ask them what their intentions are around this proposal? Do we have to wait until they actually file to begin to understand what's going on here?
The board's role in the, as you know, in the ULURP process is that we have to review a proposal. Now, I'm not sure what the proposal is. I've heard a couple things from when you were here last.
Yeah, I get that. I get that how the rules work. We've been through this. But is there a way that the community board can reach out to Arrow and ask them what their intention is?
Well, I can ask, do you think they would provide their intentions? Well, typically there is.
I think it would be a good thing for the board to approach Arrow and ask them if they intend to file tourism.
Well, I certainly think we can talk about it in committee. I'm not the chair, so that I cannot promise you, but part of it is do we know who we would be contacting? And do we know that? I mean, have you provided that to the board?
No, I know Juki actually encouraged us from city planning to reach that the applicant's representative from their legal firm could be reached out to. And I think the community would welcome the opportunity for them to present their proposal before it hits ULURP. I know other developers have had that courtesy to the community board before. And it's a large enough and precedent setting enough zoning proposal that I think it would merit engagement with the community before it hits ULURP.
I am not aware actually of what the proposal is. So, I mean, you say it's significant and large. I mean, in what shape or form?
I don't want to eat up the time tonight with all of that. Right now, the block allows 3-story zoning, 33 feet, and they're proposing 13-story towers on that block. And we think that's impactful to all of CB7 to just have that kind of quadruple zoning precedent. I know, throughout the entire swath of CB7.
All right, so while we do this, we will take it into the committee, see if we can get the actual contact person that you feel would be best addressed to. And then we'll see what we can do. All right, so did you have a question, John?
What do they want to do on Sealy Street? Sorry? Okay, thank you.
All right, so I'm now going to move on to the agenda, which is to review the City of Yes for economic opportunity. Again, second proposal of 3 zoning proposals that are going through text amendments that are going through city review right now. This is not a ULURP action. This is a text amendment. Therefore, it doesn't require really a discretionary action on our part. It's just advisory. We had voted on the first part of the proposal, the sustainability principles in favor back in, was it October, September, or earlier 2023. So this is the second. I will say that we are anxiously awaiting the third piece, which is for housing. We have not received that yet. I believe it's not even issued yet. But as you know, CB7, housing is very important to us. And so we are waiting anxiously to see that. However, the second proposal on economic opportunity is extensive. There are 18 separate proposals. It is one package of 18 separate amendment text changes that we will need to review and vote on. So without further ado, what I'd like to do is have Juki Sai, and we also have Laura Smith from DCP here to do a quick recap of what we discussed. Oh, I'm sorry. Before that, let's do roll call then.
Isn't it yet? Okay, so we're gonna start with the Land Use Committee. And bear with us, we have 3 committees to go through. If you are joining us via Zoom, please unmute yourself when I call your name, acknowledge your name, and then mute yourself again. Of course, if you're joining us on Zoom, you do not count towards the quorum. As I said, we're starting with the Land Use Committee. Diana Gonzalez. John Fontillis.
Here.
Thank you. Joan Body. Thank you. Christina Das. Gabina Morales Escamilla. Thank you. Cynthia Gonzalez. Kenny Guan. Julia Melzer Harris. Thank you. Julia, you do not count towards the quorum. Nicholas Jackson. Thank you. Zach Jacey. Christina Lem. Paul Mack. Antoinette Martinez. Thank you. Marilyn Melman. Jamie Nelson. Karen Rolnick. Thank you. Tamara Santiago. 6 in attendance. Land use does not have a quorum. We'll move on to economic development and small business. Tamara Santiago. Amel Afzal. Joan Body. Thank you. Esteban Chavez. Thank you. Gabina Morales Escamilla. Thank you. Cynthia Gonzalez. Diana Gonzalez. Hector Gonzalez. Zachary Jacey. Nicholas Jackson. Thank you. Jeremy Kaplan.
Here.
Jeremy, you do not count towards the quorum. Antoinette Martinez. Thank you. Marilyn Melman. Karen Rolnick. Thank you. John Santori. Thank you. John, you do not count towards the quorum. Next, we'll start with Katie Walsh. Thank you. John DeLuper. Thank you. Damian Andrade. Joan Body. Thank you. Jerry Chan. Thank you. Gabino Morales Escamilla. Thank you. Zach Jacy. Daniel Kaminsky. Thank you. Daniel, you do not count towards the quorum. Angie Lau. Roberto Martinez. Marilyn Melman. Jamie Nelson. Sam Sierra. Thank you. Cindy Vandenbosch. Transportation has a quorum. Nobody leave.
So,
But you can open the meeting.
all right, so on the strength of transportation's overwhelming numbers, we will open the meeting. But then Julia is able to vote, correct?
Yes.
So on the basis of transportation getting us through land use, no one on the land use committee can leave. Sorry, you're locked in until we vote. Great. Thank you so much. All right, Juki, take us through a recap.
Amy Nelson. Thank you. Figuring that out now.
Go ahead, Jeremy. John. Our online folks. All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Juki. I work for the Department of City Planning, Brooklyn Borough Office. I'm the Community Board 7 and Community Board 16 liaison. And I'm here to talk to you tonight just a little bit about zoning for economic opportunity. That's a second in a series of zoning text amendments that the city is rolling out. The first was zoning for carbon neutrality, which we spoke about, in the late summer, early fall, and was voted on. This one is zoning for economic opportunity. And the last one, the forthcoming one that we haven't filed yet and you will hear all about is City of Yes for housing opportunity. But tonight I'm going to just do a very brief summary of City of Yes for economic opportunity. And I'm going to do a very, very high level overview, but I'm here tonight with Laura Smith, the Deputy Director of our Strategic Planning Division, to talk about and field any questions from the board and go into depth on the proposals. And if we can't answer something, we're more than happy to go back to the department, the folks that wrote the text amendment, and get an answer out to Community Board 7. So you're going to bear with me with this very high level summary, and I'll try to make sure I touch on some of the concerns that were sent to me. I believe Diana forwarded me a couple questions from the board, and I'll try as I'm going through these to touch a little bit on them, and I'll actually save the micro distribution last mile question, which I know is a big one for this board, till the very end. So yeah, just rolling through City of Yes for economic opportunity. And yeah, this is quite a bit of information and I'm going to go through it kind of fast. So again, if there are very specific proposals you're interested in, please write them down, flag them. We can go back to them after I go through everything. And we can make sure to get you the details on them and to answer questions on them. So City of Yes for economic opportunity, just to frame it very, very broadly. Many of you are probably familiar with the zoning resolution. Some of you may not be. It's an enormous document, very complicated, lots of technical stuff, but it governs all of the land use in New York City. And the basic intent of City of Yes for economic opportunity is to tinker with some of the parts of the zoning resolution that we think are kind of holding back economic opportunity in New York City. And there are four kind of key areas that we're working on revising the zoning resolution on. And again, all of these are kind of small changes to the zoning resolution that cumulatively we think can make a big impact and really cultivate sort of strong economic opportunity and mimic some of the great things that we see across the city. Right before I get into it, I bring this up a lot. I think Sunset Park, especially along 4th Avenue, has some of the best commercial corridors in the city. And I'm not just saying that because I'm here. I love walking up and down 4th, 5th, 8th. And those are some of the naturally occurring great things we see there, like high density, a lot of stores. Sometimes there's multi-level stores, really great walkable streetscapes. Those are things that we love and we don't want to change. But they're things we want to see kind of all over the city and in neighborhoods that don't necessarily currently have them. And we want to, again, open up the zoning just a little bit, tinker here and there to allow these things to happen and to allow for, higher, lower vacancy rates, allow for easier business location, et cetera. So to go into our four kind of big goals, I don't know if everyone can see the screen, but the first goal is to make it easier for businesses to find space and grow. I'm going to go into that in just 1 minute, some of the specifics. The second goal is to boost some of our growing industries across the city and really kind of reducing the obstacles for new businesses to be able to locate in the city. The third is to enable more business-friendly streetscapes. And again, delivering active, safe, walkable streets and sort of mimic some of the great things that we see in our already booming commercial corridors. And then the last one is to create new opportunities for businesses to open by establishing some new zoning tools to boost job growth and business expansion. And this does include the creation of some new districts, but we're not mapping them. We are just creating them should someone want to map them in the future. So to get into some of the proposals, I'm going to get into goal 1 really quickly. And again, there's just a lot in here. But as far as the 6 different proposals in our first kind of goal 1, and again, these are sort of changing the actual zoning text to allow for more of these things. The first one is just allowing stores to react, closed stores that are in residential areas that had existed in the past to potentially reopen. It doesn't mean that they necessarily will. But for example, if there was a bodega on a residential corner that is no longer allowed to open because it exceeded the 2 years in the zoning that restricts it, it could then open back up. The second proposal goal 1 is to simplify the commercial district types. So currently there's a whole bunch of different uses in all of our commercial districts, and we're trying to kind of combine some of them to simplify our C2, C4 districts. Again, these are kind of technical in the weeds things, but there's very kind of what we feel now are arbitrary kind of uses being allowed in our various districts. And we want to simplify them, make it very clear that on one block, sometimes there's a commercial district that is slightly different and that allows different things. And it's kind of confusing and arcane. And we just want to simplify it to allow kind of businesses that are typically on commercial corridors to locate there without being really, really nitpicky. We want to enable more small scale production. And this is especially sort of super clean, what are sometimes light industrial uses to locate in more of our commercial corridors. We want to allow for, and again, I'm getting kind of maybe too into the weeds here, but loosen some of the guidelines on loading docks. There are a lot of new businesses that might typically require a loading dock, just sort of written into the zoning as is. But that is kind of prohibitively expensive and a lot of businesses that may actually not need them. And we want to sort of make it a little bit easier to locate without the sort of more heavy loading dock regulations. We want to, and this is one that I know was a little bit that we received some questions on, allow commercial on some floors, like upper floors. And to put it simply, in a lot of the commercial districts, this is just allowing some commercial use on the second floor. And I know there was some concern about why would we allow commercial use on floors higher than the second? And I want to emphasize, and I have a map to show this if anyone wants to see it, that is only in our higher level commercial districts. I believe it's C4 through C6. If I'm wrong, I'll make sure to correct that. And that's a very, very limited part of Sunset Park that I'm happy to point out. Yep, on Fifth Avenue, exactly. But that's not all over the district, and I can make sure that I point it out. Either way, I wanted to, this was a question that we got. And the intent of this is really, to allow for where there are buildings, where there are multiple stories. We felt that there are certain instances where it is not inappropriate for certain commercial uses to locate above a residential use. And especially to fill in, if there are vacancies, like if there is a 5-story building, and they're, residential on the second, third, fourth floors. We think that, and again, only limited to very specific commercial districts. And I believe that's C4 through C6, just quite limited in Sunset Park. And I can show the map. We want to be able to permit some of those uses on higher floors, but again, making sure that there are clear, separate entrances, and that the residential use and commercial use are not interfering with one another. We certainly do not want to put noxious uses above residential uses. That's not the point here. It's really to just allow some of the commercial uses, the lighter ones, to fill in kind of the empty slots left in commercial districts. The last proposal for, again, our goal 1 is to, yep.
Keep saying Sunset Park.
Yeah.
We have other areas in Sunset Park.
Yeah.
Why are you not including those areas in anything, the meetings that I've attended? You've always said Sunset Park.
So just as far as like, why am I not saying Windsor Terrace and the rest of the district? I can make sure to, I think I just think of like right outside this door, but you're correct. You're absolutely correct. I'll make sure to say Community Board 7. You are right. I apologize, Joan. That's a great call. No, you're right. Sunset Park, parts of Windsor Terrace, South Slope. Is there anywhere else I'm missing? Yeah, the board. Okay, yeah. You're right, absolutely. So just to continue, oh.
Thank you.
Sorry, I don't think it's going to be under 10 minutes. Yeah, we got a lot of them. And I'll really try to speed up. Good to go.
Yeah.
Okay. So the last part of making it easier for businesses to find space and locate is just modernizing some of the use terms in the zoning resolution. So moving on to goal 2, supporting growing industries. We want to permit indoor agriculture in commercial areas. So if someone wants to do like a small indoor hydroponic herb garden, we think that's appropriate in commercial areas. We want to boost some of the life sciences, which is a big growing industry in New York City, by allowing regulated labs to expand near hospitals and universities. The proposal 9 is to allow the sort of rules currently around what dancing and concerts are permitted at bars and restaurants are somewhat, we think, outdated and preventing just, the general function of some of our bars and restaurants in the city. And we're going to liberalize that a little bit and allow some more, modest increases in the sort of dancing and recreation permitted at bars. The last proposals in the supporting growing industries, we're going to better sort of define and enable amusements that I think locate all across the city, to sort of define them a little bit more clearly and allow them to locate a little bit closer to more traditional commercial corridors. So, folks have to travel kind of for whether, I think a lot of young people like the trampoline parks and stuff, and some of the more kind of like fun amusements that are classified in groups that like push them pretty far away from main commercial corridors, and we don't want to allow them to come a little bit closer. The last part of supporting growing industries is allowing a little bit more flexibility for people to locate businesses in their homes. Now, I want to note this is not allowing really large scale, huge business operations out of people's homes. These are small things like barbers. And I think that's a great example, something in the pandemic where someone has a small business, like again, cutting hair is a great example, where they can, do it out of their home, and serve their sort of community, and also not necessarily like they may not have the means to get a full shop or anything like that, but we want to reduce some of the barriers and make sure we're doing it above board. We want it, to be approved again under zoning, but also this is something that there's rules that enforce the rest of this. So goal 3, fostering vibrant neighborhoods. We want to promote better ground floor designs and basically create kind of consistent and easy guidelines that commercial businesses have to adhere to in order to kind of locate. And again, we want to mimic some of the great streetscapes in Community Board 7 where, you're walking down the street. And again, there's these corridors in Sunset, there's these corridors in Windsor Terrace, right off of, right just south of, okay, that's a good, I'm not, I'll have to look into it. Again, but just having clear rules and design guidelines to make sure we have a good streetscapes. 13, again, we want to reduce some of the conflicts we see on streets with auto repair. And this is where sometimes auto repair shops spill out onto the street and are doing sort of repairs where people are walking. And while we do understand the importance of, people being able to get their flat fixed, we also want to create a situation and slightly more stringent regulations actually on where auto repair shops, and especially based off the kind of auto repair shops, can locate, and then also make sure that they have plans for how they're going to be interacting with the pedestrian walkway. 14, and I know we're going to get into this more later, but enabling micro distribution centers in specific commercial areas. And the point of this, and there's kind of 2 classifications of this. There's a much smaller one we're going to allow in we're proposing to allow in some of the smaller commercial districts. I believe that's up to 2,000 or 3,000 feet. Is that right, Laura? And then I'll make sure I have that exact number. And then in our slightly larger commercial districts, allowing micro distribution centers up to 5,000 feet. And again, I know we're going to get into this more, but the intent here is and this is again all over the city. The intent is to sort of distribute some of where the last mile of delivery happens. And especially we want to encourage use where that last step of delivery is either the customer going to pick it up, a cargo bike or courier going out. And, we believe that these last mile, the sort of the last step being located closer to customers is a way to cultivate some of those last mile delivery steps that don't involve a van or a motor vehicle. And that's our intent with that. And I know we'll talk more about it later. So goal 4, creating new opportunities for local businesses to open. The first one of these is enabling resident serving retail services at some of our larger scale campuses, like residential campuses like NYCHA. So I believe there aren't a ton of big NYCHA campuses in Community Board 7 unless zero. Yep. So, all right, keep moving. So the 16 is creating a process to allow new small like corner stores and locally serving storefronts in residential areas. And again, this is not as of right, but this is allowing a, I believe, authorization or certification for stores to apply. Again, these are small local retail stores locating in potentially in residential neighborhoods. And this would be, hey, you know, like there's big residential neighborhood, there's a block and there's no, you know, small corner store that people want to go to. I think that's something a lot of people, New Yorkers enjoy. But again, this is creating a process for them to be able to apply to locate. The last couple, 17, adopting spaces for industries like film, giving businesses like film studios a rational process to allow them to adapt and expand. And then the last one, and I don't know if Jesse's here, but the last one is creating a few new zoning districts, and it's creating basically a set of new zoning tools for future development of job-intensive buildings and manufacturing districts, and for the preservation of core industrial areas. And I want to stress the creation of these new zones or these new zoning districts does not mean that we are changing any of the underlying zoning that exists now. What we're doing is just creating a new set of tools that should the city do a rezoning or a private applicant do a rezoning, it is just a new district that exists that has a set of regulations in terms of use, in terms of the building size permitted, that we think more closely resemble or that provides some more like opportunities for the sort of the current trends that we're seeing in M uses. Again, that is something that if one of these new districts gets proposed, it goes through the Euler process, but it is just the creation of new types of districts in order for them to be on the table as an opportunity for a potential, you know, should a rezoning happen on a specific property or in a specific area. So that, again, is the broad overview. And we're more than happy to go into kind of detail on some of these. And I also, if anyone has questions on where a specific project or, excuse me, a proposal will apply, what we have in this presentation is a set of maps. And I know it's a little bit small, but that can kind of show some of where XYZ project is applicable. Yeah, so for example,
Well, Juki, why don't we hold that?
Yeah,
for
go ahead.
questions and we can pick that up. I guess, Jeremy, a question. We can vote on the proposal as a whole, but I have a feeling that each one of the 18 elements might have some discussion and or conditions attached to it, either by the committee or the board. Not that I want to do 18 separate votes. Okay, so I think unfortunately we're going to have to do it as 18 separate votes. I hate to say that, but what I think what I do is let's spend about 10 minutes on open questions to Juki and Laura, so hopefully they can explain a little bit more about the rationale behind some of these elements. And then when we go through the votes, I think what we can do is if we'll state the proposal, do a little bit of discussion, hopefully a minute or two, if anybody has a question, and then vote on it in order to move it. Okay. And again, you know, part of it is also it's not just a vote. We could also attach conditions to the vote if we choose to. Because it doesn't have to be a clean vote up or down. It could be, you know, we like this, but we have, you know, concerns about something specific. Okay. All right. Let's go with Katie first. Well, I thought that's why I'd say we'd spend the next 10 minutes with board members, and then we'll take a few questions from the public, if there are any questions on City of Yes. And then we'll go into the vote. John Centaur? Sure.
I'll try to talk about.
I'll repeat the question. That's fine. Has this been the first time that we've discussed City of Yes economic opportunity? As we said earlier, there are 3 sections to this zoning text amendment package. One was what we voted on in September, which were sustainability and resiliency issues. We voted in the affirmative, and that passed unanimous. Well, that passed the board. This package of items we had reviewed in December under land use. We did not have quorum that night when we had a public hearing on it. All the community boards sent a combined letter to DCP and asked for an extension to review because it was happening at the end of the year. So because DCP is not voting on it, I'm sorry, city planning is not voting on it until February, early February. We have this opportunity to have this second meeting tonight. But it was only under land use in December.
So this is the last opportunity for CB7 to take a vote. I mean, the reason I'm asking is there any opportunity for committees that are hearing this for the first time to meet again before being asked to vote on it?
Well, truth be told, we actually have quorum for all 3 committees. So we could, depending on the chairs, we could also take questions and even vote if you maintain quorum for your committee at the end of the evening, if you'd like. But as you know, this is essentially the second public hearing and committee meeting for land use. We will still have the full board meeting on this next week.
Okay, but just for the record, economic development has not, we haven't, I'm a member of that committee. That's why I'm asking as a community member. We haven't seen this before. This is the first time we've seen this in.
Exactly. The moving committee on this proposal, since it's a land use element, was land use. Jerry? Karen, then John.
Plan B, I think, or go to sorry, my memory is not telling me that one. Remember which one? Go to. Yeah. But is this also allow cannabis growing indoor too?
It does, yeah. All right, Karen, then John.
Hi, will the nightlife and amusement part of it, will that be as of right, or will the community board be allowed to weigh in on that?
So I can actually read a little bit more in depth on that one because that's a good question. So what we want to do with this proposal is clarifying zoning to regulate nightlife based on the capacity of businesses rather than the type of live entertainment within the operation, and then 200-person capacity on businesses in C1 and C3. And then in larger nightlife businesses, they'd be allowed in C4, C8, M1, M3. And then the last point is here, nightlife venues still subject to permitting and enforcement by other agencies. So I guess the question though is, as far as allowing some of the more liberal uses, like sort of dancing in bars, that would be mostly as of right. But again, there's still a set of guidelines that regulate the size of venues that can locate in specific places. So the idea is like, there won't allow based off of, again, the sizes, like one of the huge nightclubs that you see in, let's say, Midtown Manhattan, wouldn't just all of us, with a capacity of 1,000 people, wouldn't all of a sudden be allowed to locate in just like a small, storefront bar. But if a bar wanted, that currently exists, was like, we have a small dance floor in the back, in all likelihood, ZEO would allow some dancing or maybe a small comedy show to occur there as of right, yeah.
Right, because we already have an amusement center in our neighborhood that's kind of overwhelming the block with litter and traffic, so that would be a concern. And another quick question with the auto repair piece of it, they will be protecting sidewalks and pedestrians, but will they also have to be more cognizant of bicycle lanes?
That's a great question. So let me go to that one. I know we have some bikers in the audience. I was talking to Jay about biking on 4th Avenue earlier. So as far as the plans in general, and I want to make sure I'm looking at this one right. I think this is something where our intent is to make sure that like these auto repair shops, and Laura, correct me if I'm wrong, do have a plan for the area that they're using in front of their store. But this is something that, and I can follow up on this. This is a great concern in our, we care about bikers a lot in the city. But as far as making sure that it's pedestrians walking as well as bikers, I can make sure to follow up on that and give you an answer on it. But, I presume that in, the plans that we want to see, we want it to be safe, again, for people walking and for people biking. But that's a great question. Yeah, go ahead, Laura.
So I think sort of the way to think about this is today we see bad actors all over the city, right? When it comes to these auto repair uses, you see tires being changed on the street, you see cars being parked in the bike lane. And there's nothing inherent about a C2 district where these are permitted that somehow makes it okay to do that type of activity. At the same time, they're performing a very important and necessary use for the city. So we don't want to push them further out into the margins of the city and sort of like impose that burden on people who need their services. So the idea behind this is allow these uses in a slightly broader array of neighborhoods or commercial corridors in the city, but make the rules more stringent. So that, as Juki mentioned, they have to have sort of a plan for how they will be good actors in the public realm, including in the bike lane. So it's a BSA special permit. And then enforcement ultimately comes down to the NYPD and DOT and DOB. So I think like across the board, we hear enforcement issues. And obviously as a Department of City Planning, we're not an enforcement agency. We have been working incredibly closely with the enforcement agencies because I think a lot of the concerns that we hear about commercial uses or industrial uses really ultimately come down to not so much the way the use is designed to work, but the way the use actually sort of operates in practice in a neighborhood. And so we've been working throughout this proposal with not just BSA, who sort of signs off on the plan, but with DOT, with DOB, with NYPD, FDNY, for all of the proposal components that Juki mentioned. We recognize that, that enforcement is a challenge in a city as large as New York and with such a diversity of uses, but we really have been making a very robust effort to work closely with our enforcing agencies on this one.
Laura, can I follow up? So you're saying that in order for say a tire changing place to be allowed on a district like C2 or
like a C1 overlay sort of local commercial corridor where they're not allowed to.
that they would have to go to BSA first in order to get a special permit?
I have to let me look up the exact technicality there that they're going to need to apply, but it's not going to be an as of right allowance.
Highly doubt that a tire changing place at the margins that they would charge would hire a zoning lawyer to, proceed through a BSA special permit.
And I think what you're pointing out is sort of the obvious that for most of what we're proposing to do here, we don't expect this to suddenly unlock a sort of tidal wave of new uses in new places, but we want to enable them if they have the means to or the desire to.
Or the flip, that you don't have the ability to call them out on it if they're changing tires in the middle of 4th Avenue, that we don't have a law right now that says they can't.
Well, there's they're enforcement agencies today, and they will be the same enforcement agencies in the future. Today, you are not allowed to change a tire on the sidewalk, or you're not allowed to park in a bike lane. And
Could I change tires in the first parking lane of Fourth Avenue?
unless you yourself have a flat tire.
Well, I know there are 30 separate businesses on Fourth Avenue that do that.
Yes,
so.
and I think we heartily acknowledge that there is a problem with some of these uses operating in the public realm, and this is precisely what we're working to try to remedy.
And I will say, I've been around long enough to see that we've tried to change our zoning, multiple times. We had 1916 zoning, for those of you who remember that. And then we changed it 50 years later in 1961. Now 57 years later, I can't count, but another 50 years have gone by and we're going to try and change the zoning again. I mean, I would have said that a lot of these things are common sense and they're a long time coming, but even just this one, I'm sensing that we don't really have a clear answer. If what you're saying is that, we're changing a rule to help enforcement, but as Katie said, enforcement is lacking already. And if you can't do it now, what exactly is this rule trying to do?
So let me first clarify something I said earlier. They would in fact need to get a BSA special permit in order to operate in a district where they're not permitted to operate today. So there is an angle here where we are trying to make the city a more flexible place to operate a business where there's market demand. At the same time, we don't just want to sort of open the door to auto repair uses in neighborhoods where they're not permitted today at all, and recognizing that we have an enforcement issue with how some of them sort of treat the public realm. So I think what we're hoping through the way we're treating auto repair uses and as part of ZEO is broadening the geographic locations where they can operate, but make it a little bit harder to do so. Ultimately, the enforcement, we will continue to rely on today's enforcement agencies, but I can at least assure the audience here that we've been working very closely with them throughout the development of this proposal to acknowledge where there have been challenges in the past, acknowledge where there continue to be challenges, and work with them to try to work that out. But I think your point that you caused me to question the proposal. Are we really sort of going to be subjecting an auto repair operator to apply for a BSA special permit to open up in a C11 district? We are. That is going to be a burden, so which is why we don't expect to see this happening large scale, but there may be a situation where it does, and I think we would want to give that business the opportunity.
Okay. Great, thank you. Antoinette, let me just finish with the board members and then we'll get to the public because we got to vote on this too. So Antoinette first and then John. Oh, I'm sorry, John. Let me, I'll get to it. Go ahead, go.
All right.
Then keep moving.
Okay, sorry about that. Thank you for the many presentations that you've conducted so far. Just want to comment on the process for all of this. Because these are zoning text amendment changes, it doesn't follow the same process as a ULURP. So if it feels like things are moving relatively quickly, and if a lot of folks on the community board haven't had opportunities like during committee meetings to really dissect and participate and take a look into this, it's because it's, in my opinion, purposely being pushed through. The City Planning Commission, they're holding a public hearing actually on January 24th. So it'll be in a couple of weeks. Last week, on January 5th, there was a public hearing at the Brooklyn Borough President's Office. Reynoso wasn't even in attendance, but a number of people who did participate, members of the community, they spoke out against it. Julio was there. So just wanted to weigh in on that piece. So yeah, just because this is a zoning text amendment change, it doesn't follow the same process as a ULURP. So, you don't have to have a public hearing. It's really up to the community board if they want to have that. It's very optional. These are blanket changes that they're looking to make to the entire city. So every single neighborhood that they're trying to, plug in, and we don't really know what the long-term effects of that are going to be. So I think, we should really just take a step back and really think about, what's the real intention here. And I feel like a lot of things in the presentation are being minimized, because someone could have done a presentation on urban air and been like, oh, it's just going to be a little park, and then now we're looking and we're seeing the other effects of that space. The one concern I had in particular was on Fifth Avenue, so that C4 district is between 47th Street and 57th Street, and that's very low density. And there are a lot of folks that live on top of those commercial spaces. And during a Euler, people really pushed for a racial impact study. Are you looking at displacement of folks who live above those commercial, retail stores on Fifth Avenue? Will those stores be able to have people displaced so that they can charge a higher rent for a commercial use? My whole issue with this is that all of this is being pushed through as a text amendment change. It's being rushed through, and we fought so hard for a Euler process so that we can have a racial impact study, and it's not even clear if that's something that can happen with this.
All right, let's get that answer. Is that racial impact study a part of this process?
So,
Thought it showed it in the DC.
an RER. So I think there's a specific set of criteria, and I can get that to the board on what triggers an RER. And I don't believe we're doing one for zoning for economic opportunity. I will say a lot of RERs typically have to do with residential development, but again, I can get you all the criteria on that, and it's a very set piece of like criteria that was rolled out when the law was rolled out. And I think it's a like really legitimate thing to bring up. And again, I can make sure I get you the exact criteria that trigger one. And we, when there is one sort of like when an application hits the right marks, we always prepare one for it. To that point though, when we do go through ULURP, it's for a specific set of actions, and just the nature of the actions that are part of this text amendment is again a slightly different process. And I think, in going through this, like there are no technical changes to the zoning map itself. It's changes to the zoning text. I know that's kind of like a technical, maybe meaningless thing, but it just has a slightly different process. And I hear what you're saying in terms of, it's not feeling like we're rushing it through. We did really try to do quite a bit of outreach. And this is something where we tried to make public hearings, or at the very least info sessions, like early in the process, and have multiple ones open to the public. And then also we have really been to, I think many boards 2 or 3 times, but we are trying to get out to every single board. We've sent out communication. I know certainly in Brooklyn, that's my office, have sent out like invites to every single board to go out multiple times. And this again is something we want feedback on. Yep.
My concern is that these zoning text amendment changes will allow for a number of as of right uses that folks in the community won't have the opportunity to weigh in on.
So I guess I hear what you're saying, because I literally did just say we are trying to sort of simplify some of the use groups. And I guess maybe an example, like I want to make sure I'm getting into the specifics of what we're trying to allow here. So like one of the big things we're trying to do, and getting into the weeds just a little bit, I imagine many of you are familiar or have heard the term, I think we were saying it earlier, C1 district and C2. And those are typically commercial overlays along, in residential neighborhoods. Like let's say along 4th Avenue, it might be a C24 overlay that allows certain commercial uses, typically on the ground floor on a given street. So when we're saying we are trying to permit more uses as of right, you are correct. But what we're really trying to do is not fundamentally like just allow for the largest, heaviest manufacturing use right in the middle of a residential neighborhood. That's not at all what we're trying to do. What we're really trying to do is simplify some of like the differences between C1 and C2, for example, that we think are kind of arbitrary and sort of prevent, if you're a small business trying to locate, if there's a C1 on one side of the street and a C2 on the other, like depending on what your use group is, you might not be able to like locate in one of them. And I want to give just a couple examples so we know what we're talking about. So currently, like a couple of uses that are, let's see, like for example, yeah, like allowed in a C2, but not in a C1 would be like personal and business services and entertainment uses. And again, this is something where like personal business services, that'd be like a tax center or something. Like, again, it's something where we think these are uses that like, it's again, a lot of the same streets where there might be a C1 on one side and a C2 on the other, where we're like, these are uses that we think are compatible in these districts, but it's not, for example, mapping broad swaths of new commercial districts. It's just allowing slightly more like permissible uses within what currently exists. And, I know there are some people, plenty of folks who may not love that, but I think that's the general intent. But it is, again, not to mix like the heaviest uses that we see by the waterfront and put them in the plopping them in the middle of a residential district. That's not what we're trying to do at all.
John.
All right, so I have a little bit of a multi-parter because I'm a little confused on some of the stuff you mentioned. So first, with the discussion about the repair shops and them having to create a safety plan, this is only on new ones going forward, right? None of these changes are retroactive or applying to existing businesses?
Yes.
And then related to that, is the auto repair also, the changes to that also apply to car dealerships? Because we have several of those in the district now.
No, I don't believe so.
Because I would like to suggest, and I don't know if our committee gets to vote on this, but that be added, because the car dealerships have a lot of the same problems that the repair shops do, of parking all over the sidewalks, ignoring enforcement, actually no enforcement, I should say, and all those issues that apply to the repair shops apply to the car dealerships, in many ways worse because they have so many more cars that they store out on the sidewalk.
Car dealerships, motorbike dealerships.
Yes.
Motorbike repair shops,
Yeah, them too.
bike, sort of all that entire.
Motorized
category.
vehicles in general, yeah.
Don, that's great feedback, and I appreciate it. I take that back.
Thank
Well,
you.
I mean, actually, just to check, does the grandfathering of the previous use, does that run with the owner or run with?
First, I don't want to characterize it as a safety plan. In order to operate a new facility or a new auto repair shop, you need to file with the BSA for a special permit. BSA will weigh in on this sort of appropriateness within the public realm, whether like they can actually fit the use behind the lot line, as opposed to sort of like, do they have aspirations to actually do their business on the sidewalk? As far as grandfathering in existing uses, it conveys with the use, not the owner. But again, it's not so much a grandfathering in because the use is permitted, it's just by a special permit. So yes, if your auto body shop transfers, from yourself to your child, when you retire, that can continue. It's really for a new auto, it's for a new auto body shop.
Okay, cool. And then related to this, actually not related to this, but staying on the traffic and transportation stuff, the changes to the curb cuts and loading docks, how has DCP studied the impacts of increased double parking? I know there was talk about there being a lot of these small businesses which may not need a loading dock, but if they don't have a loading dock, they're gonna double park. And then especially I'm thinking on 5th and 8th Avenue, where they're, having impacts on the traffic, on buses. How is that gonna be addressed? Because I know some of the businesses on each of those do have curb cuts, and from my anecdotal experience, it seems to make a difference. But if you guys have different data, I'm definitely interested.
So we have looked at the existence of curb cuts and loading berths and the utilization. And in many cases, they aren't used. In many cases, the loading berth opens and you see that there's all manners of stuff being stored there, but there's no actual room for the truck. In many existing cases, the loading berths were designed before truck sizes expanded, and so they physically can't fit the trucks. That being said, I am a proponent of having smart places to do loading and unloading that's not in the parking lane or the bike lane or the sidewalk. The sort of key to this proposal is not requiring new industrial uses to punch out new curb cuts and new loading berths into an existing building. Today, loading is one of the few things that we require to be sort of compliant with for a new business that's moving into a building. We don't require a new business that might have a higher parking requirement to chop out part of the building and create more parking spaces, but we do require them to chop out space for a loading berth. And that is where things get prohibitive for the economy. We have a lot of old spaces. They make great spaces to do business, but we preclude a lot of businesses that may want to operate there by telling them the only way you can move in there is if you create a new curb cut, punch out some space, and can accommodate a truck off the street. Curb cuts themselves are obviously not great either for sort of the pedestrian realm. We have been working very closely with DOT about smarter ways to do loading and unloading. There are complications there too. People object to the taking of a parking space to do curbside loading in a sort of safe and contained way, but we are working closely with them. But fundamentally, we are trying to alleviate the burden of having to create a new space to do loading in a building that doesn't have one today.
And last thing on those economic impacts you mentioned, now that there's increased of blending of uses between residential, commercial, and industrial, how is that going to impact taxes? Because I know that the different types of zoning are taxed at different rates, and depending on geographies, it also varies. Will this plan and the new blending impact the taxes on both residents and businesses in the neighborhood?
I cannot answer that question. I'll have to talk to OMB and get back to you. It's a good question.
So they determine all the changes.
Yeah, Department of Finance.
Other board questions? Yeah, actually, that's been holding. Who is it? One second, or just let me get the person who's been on Zoom for a while.
Jeremy Kaplan.
Jeremy,
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
near you.
Okay, great. Yeah, I was gonna say, I think Sunset Park is a really interesting example of the importance of not blurring zoning, and that I think the Sunset Park community has spent a lot of time, protecting our industrial waterfront, and that we've seen more and more issues when we've done a lot to, eat away at our industrial waterfront and in industrial spaces. And I think what we're pointing out, which I think is very interesting, and I'll go back to the car dealership thing, is that it feels like that these amendments are mainly actually more for like not small businesses, but much larger businesses. And that it's interesting that like some of these things that would apply for small auto body shops don't apply to a large sort of corporate dealer, which we have several of them and several of new ones that have just opened up along in Industry City. Porsche, Volvo, there's BMW and other ones as well. But yeah, I think it's really interesting that we see the DCP sort of minimizing this, but yet at the same time, really at the end of the day, zoning, people actually spend a lot of time arguing over mixed use and having issues with various mixed uses, and that a lot of people have problems when they feel like their residential block has businesses that encroach too much upon it. So it's interesting because I think for us in Sunset Park, we've had an actually really good separation in some way. And, it's not perfect, but we've protected the industrial waterfront, which is one of the last ones. And, so I think it's very important for us to speak up on this because we've been very deliberate. This community has been deliberate about preserving the industrial waterfront and the businesses that go on there. And, at times I've appreciated things like a urban air, but we've heard complaints about it. And I would not have expected, a small trampoline park, well, it's a very large trampoline park to cause a lot of problems. But yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to basically being like, we cannot minimize this as these are actually massive changes. When they're built up one by one by one, I mean, I think if we were talking about this on an individual level, a community level, but it's a whole citywide level, there's a lot of stuff in this that does not work for our community that maybe works for Manhattan. And I feel like Manhattan communities can have those decisions and those says. And that's why I think this process is problematic and troublesome, that, we're essentially trying to do this whole giant overlay that's being enforced top down instead of from community up, with communities saying, we want to change zoning, we want to change the uses.
All right, thank you, Jeremy.
Can I respond to that really quick, John?
Sure.
Jeremy, I appreciate your comment here. I just wanted to clarify something really quick. I know historically in Community Board 7, there has been a really staunch defense of the working waterfront. And I just want to clarify here that very few of the changes in ZEO, or really none, are going to fundamentally change the nature of the M31 district across 3rd Avenue. And in fact, like the creation of the new districts, if there's a world where, someone wanted to map a core, like one of the new manufacturing districts, that is the most intense manufacturing uses, the heaviest uses that you see along the waterfront, that new tool exists if someone would want to map it. But I think what I want to say pretty clearly is that, like, the sort of the uses, again, that are separated by zoning districts, like our M uses, and then the sort of heavier large buildings located on the waterfront, are going to remain the uses that they are currently. And a lot of what, we are changing is going to be much smaller, sort of nibbling around the edges changes, not like a fundamental change of, for example, the big M3 district on the water. Again, it's not blending everything together. It's within the things where we feel like there are small changes that can be made, and adjustments to allow for sort of easier location. We're doing that. But again, upland, it's not like we are going to suddenly allow residential on the waterfront. That's absolutely not happening. And the sort of defense of the big M3 district on the waterfront, there's very little that is going to fundamentally change that. And then there are, again, options to map things that allow very strict protections on those. So I just wanted to clarify that, but I do appreciate, Jeremy, your comment here.
Juki, we are in receipt of a statement from Southwest Brooklyn Industrial Corporation, which, hey, Brady, hey. So we will incorporate their statement as well in our deliberations as committee. I would, though, I think the question related actually back to amusements. We are hearing quite a bit about urban air. I believe it's 20,000 square feet of trampoline and kids. There's a lot of traffic. There's a lot of parking. There's a lot of debris that's falling. That 20,000 square feet is the Rite Aid site. You could build on at 60th, right, at 4th Avenue, 62nd, which I believe is in a C. Well, but the idea that in the new regime here, it's not a manufacturing district, it's a commercial district. You could build a 20,000 square foot, maybe 40,000 if you had 2 floors right there at the Rite Aid site. And all the intended issues that we have at Urban Air could follow in a very, a residential district upland of 4th Avenue.
Well, I don't think it would allow in necessarily an explicitly residential, but if we're saying in like the C4, in a larger, like the higher density commercial quarters, we are allowing a little more liberal use. But I do think, and correct me if I'm wrong, urban air is located as of right in the M3. So, I think as is the case, there are trade-offs with everything. And one of the things, I think to Jeremy's point earlier, I think there is sometimes complaints that, because of what's zoning is constricting these uses in such a way that, an entertainment center, which may be a bad actor, which I'm not going to defend it, but is fundamentally a place for kids and families to go, because of the limitations of zoning, has to locate across Third Avenue in what is an M district, which we want to see a lot more of the sort of serious industrial uses. Again, it's not perfect, and I get what you're saying, and there are serious bad actors, and unfortunately, we don't have a perfect solution for all of them. But I do want to stress that in some of allowing this, my maybe hope would be, an urban air, a good actor, urban air-esque entertainment facility is allowed to locate a little bit closer to where families can walk there and not have to cross Third Avenue. And that in one of those larger sites in the M3 district, we could see an industrial use that is more fitting for that district. Again, there are trade-offs and nothing's perfect, but again, that's some of the intent of what we're doing here.
Well, if urban air does open at 62nd Street, I'll call you.
Okay.
All right. Any other committee member questions? Gabino, right? And then Katie.
Yeah, good evening, guys. My name is Gabino Morales Escamilla. I've been a lifelong resident here of Sunset Park. So I've been hearing a lot about the zoning district, the zoning areas here. And so we have piggybacking on what Jeremy has said on Zoom. We do have some issues regarding some businesses here in the area. So I'm just curious about if any of the chairs could please let me know if we do vote on some proposals for conditions on these areas, how much enforcement does this community board has if these businesses or these zoning areas violate those conditions? How can we mitigate, or do we have any power to mitigate these situations if they arise? What can we do to resolve the issues that come up to the board with the conditions that we set upon voting on the separate zoning areas in our area? Thank you.
Well, I mean, if you're asking a vice chair of land use, I will say, I mean, to be blunt, it's more than likely that these proposals will go through. We have typically on the board have been very vocal about every proposal that comes through. And more often than not, we attach conditions to our approval or disapproval. Actually, that's the fun part of being on the board. We can actually deny something and still comment on it and say it shouldn't happen. So, to be upfront, I think we will vote. I'm looking earlier at all the boards, and board 2 in the Bronx voted in favor, but board 8 in the Bronx absolutely not. 0 in favor. It's been a weird mix, to be quite honest. Some boards are like whole hog for this. Some boards are absolutely against, and I'm not really sure what the background is, but it seems like there's no middle ground. There's like one person abstains, right? But everyone else votes either in the positive or in the negative. I think, I mean, I would, speaking for Diana, I think we would like to take a very measured approach and make sure that everyone who has a comment is incorporated into our report. Because at the end of the day, we are advisory. We don't have we don't have the force of enforcement on us. We just pass on our recommendation going up the chain. But we can come back if something does happen. We can state that, we were either for or against the proposal. And that's why I do think it's important to vote on each one of them. So that at least the community understands where the board has deliberated and come to a conclusion. So I'm sorry, I don't think we can, prevent bad actors from happening. We're still stuck with calling, 311 or making a complaint.
Right. I do appreciate that response. Thank you very much. I do serve on a couple of committees tonight. that's going on. And
You're a
besides
triple.
tonight, yeah,
You're a
I do
threefer.
serve on public safety committees. So if by any chance, if we do have the NYPD show up to one of our committees, we're gonna make sure we push for their understanding that they need to protect our community as well as protect the businesses, but make sure that there's a peaceful, cohesive solution to neighbors' complaints and our complaints and everybody else's situational awareness that's happens in our community.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much for the answer.
Uh, Hi, Juki. A couple questions. So, activating storefronts, maybe it's just technical. I don't understand how that happens. I mean, a lot of building owners, they get to write off the losses from the taxes from those being empty. Is my understanding of why stuff sits empty for so long, because it's how tax codes are written. So with activating storefronts, just I want to have a better understanding of what that means. I will invite you to maybe, if you want to write, I'm going to go through a bunch of the questions so then I can just not have the mic anymore. One of the things that now is coming in front of community boards is weed shops. And that is something, I think the last public safety meeting, we had 5. And it doesn't mean that just because the board takes a vote on it, I mean, I'm not going to get into the technical definitions, but I know that it is something that is happening now that it's legal and dispensaries. What does that look like? Are we basically, I just want to play this out in terms of like what kinds of storefronts are being activated. And then, I mean, I'm just going to keep going on that. I guess with enable small scale production and urban agriculture, what is defined as urban agriculture? If you could define what that means. And then the auto repair, I think you heard a lot from people already with what that looks like and the lack of enforcement. So I think that's a problematic proposal. And we didn't really get to talk about the micro distribution hubs, but last mile trucking continues to be something that has not been addressed by any of these zoning proposals. We put that in our letter on carbon neutrality. I don't know how many, I mean, I'm counting 5 years that we've been engaging DCP on asking for something, and there's still not anything, and it's still not showing up in this. And I'm actually concerned that these micro delivery hubs are going to be, with the way I understand this proposal, it's actually potentially more problematic for our community, based on how I'm reading it right now. So thanks.
Thanks, Katie. So I'm going to respond to that, and then I do want to get into a little bit of the last mile there at the end. As far as activating storefronts, I hear what you're saying. Again, zoning's not like a perfect fix here. Our intent is to allow, slightly more clear and slightly more liberal uses in storefronts. Just because all of a sudden, a tax shop is now going to be able to locate where only a deli could locate. It doesn't mean that that vacancy is going to get filled immediately, but our intent is to sort of hopefully make some tinkering changes so that zoning's not an impediment. As far as like marijuana stores, so those, again, like if they aren't officially licensed stores, they are not legal. That's a serious enforcement issue. I unfortunately don't have
by the state.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh yes, like the state legal, like, yeah. I'm not exactly sure on the like which dispensaries, state versus city, et cetera. But point being, I know that there are many illegal ones. Our intent is not in any way to allow more of those or anything like that. They will remain illegal, and our hope is that enforcement and the sort of the growth of the actual legal licensed stores does happen. But as far as like small scale production and urban agriculture, the exact sort of list of what is permitted to be grown, I don't have in front of me, but my understanding is, again, it's a lot of whether like hydroponic herbs or vegetables, if a restaurant wants to put a garden on top of them, and yes, cannabis is permitted, but that does not mean, and I think it's a good question, and I want to clarify that while it is a use we're allowing and we're not running from that, It is something where we believe that if it is legally permitted, it's going to have to be licensed and regulated. And permitting the growth certainly does not mean that that there can be retail on the ground floor just like jammed in there. This would be a standalone growing facility. And again, the intent is that these are legal licensed facilities, not just like opening the door for anyone to grow whatever they want. Sorry, go ahead, Laura.
Process is technically urban agriculture is growing more than 3 plants. So you can have, I mean, Juki's example of a restaurant that wants to like grow herbs to put on their dish is sort of the example that we're going for here. Obviously, cannabis is a very hot button topic these days, and the city is very aware, the state is certainly aware. But that is really like on the margins of where we're trying to go with the urban agriculture component of all of this. But we certainly hear the concerns.
So we could grow 2 wheat plants in our house.
Yeah, I don't.
Okay, the last question I think was about last mile.
Yeah, so Katie, one thing I wanted to do, and I know you've brought this up many times, and I hear you, and again, you keep raising this, and I appreciate you doing that. It's a really important issue for the district and the city. I didn't do this when I presented. I wanted to specify what is being permitted so that just we're all very clear on it. So in C1 and C2 districts, micro distribution facilities up to 2,500 square feet would be permitted, and 2,500, someone here probably has a better idea of that than me, but that's like usually like the size of like maybe a small like row home lot. You can picture like 1,000, 2,000 square feet. And then in C4 through C7 districts, we're proposing micro distribution facilities up to 5,000 square feet. And then larger spaces, and is it that 5,000 or is it even slightly larger? Only available by BSA special permit or CPC special permit. Okay. One, addition to that is that streetscapes, the sort of streetscape regulations would prohibit the papering over of windows. We don't want to see, again, we want to see like walkable, pedestrian friendly neighborhoods. And we don't want to see just sort of like the dark stores that are papered over. But yeah, again, the intent here, like I was saying earlier, is, again, this is one where I feel like there are a lot of folks here saying this is all over the city, and it is all over the city. And we don't want to limit. I think there's often a very valid concern that last mile facilities are concentrating in one place. Some of that has to do with the existing underlying zoning, but that doesn't negate the fact that people feel uneven impacts of it. But what I do want to say is with micro distribution facilities, allowing them to locate citywide, part of our hope is that it will reduce some of the burden felt like in very specific corridors with vans. And if there's a neighborhood in the city, like the Upper East Side or the Upper West Side, where they're ordering tons and tons of packages, and a distributor like Amazon wants to locate in a small micro distribution facility in a storefront that will enable some of their last mile, we want that to be able to happen. And that's something we're very staunch about this happening citywide. And again, there's 2 sides of the coin with citywide. And I think this has been pointed out, but this is one where I'm very sort of, I think it's important to note that we want this to happen, or we want to enable this to happen everywhere so that these like facilities don't concentrate in one place. Sorry, go ahead, Laura. Yeah.
So it's 2,500 square feet in commercial overlays. So that's roughly like 25 foot wide by 100 foot deep in a district. And then up to 5,000 square feet on the ground floor in the higher density commercial district. So C4 through C7. And then up to 10,000 square feet on the second floor in those higher density districts. And again, just to sort of reiterate the point that Juki's making, I think what we've heard a lot, and I have been sort of on the sidelines of the last mile conversations at DCP for a while as well, so I'm aware of the ongoing work. I think we acknowledge that the issues associated with last mile are sort of systemic and extend through the entire supply chain. The piece of the supply chain that has yet to be addressed is truly the last mile, right? Like not the last 5 miles, not the getting from Red Hook to Park Slope, but getting from, my doorstep, a mile away. And so that's sort of where we see these micro distribution centers fitting in, is offering the option for a sustainable means of getting goods actually through the last mile to a final doorstep. There's still a lot in the system that we know needs fixing. And there's a council bill that was just passed that puts the burden on DCP to take a hard look at sort of industrial policy. Last mile is absolutely at the center of that. So we hear you, and I know we've been sort of deferring on doing something about the problem for a really long time. But I can assure you, we are compelled by law to do something now. And we want to do something also.
That's our council member who put that bill through.
Appreciate the bill genuinely, and I can say personally, I'm looking forward to working on it.
Okay, before I move on to the public, I want to recognize Councilmember Susan Swang for District 43. I don't know if you want to say a couple words here.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you all the CB7 board member. And I just took office last week, so very new. And I do have some area overlap with CB7. So I want to come here and also appreciate everyone, and also let the community know I'm here for them. I do have 8th Avenue, 7th Avenue, and I have 6, 7, 8 in your district. And my office right now is in Bensonhurst. I'm looking to get a satellite office in 8th Avenue. So it's coming. Next time, probably I will bring the phone number and the address here. And if you guys have any question or concern, you can call our office. The number is 718-307-7151. I will send you the information. And also for the presentation we see here, I do have a couple questions because 8th Avenue is high density. Right now, in second floor, not a lot of commercial, but if you say give a chance they can spend their business, it might help the business. How do we keep the quality of life there? They already have a lot of traffic there. There are people not able to find parking, and also we facing a housing issue here. Those people, if the owner of the building, they have choice to rent out their apartment to business and also rent out the apartment to residents, they definitely will rent out to business because they can make more money. So that's going to cost, my district has already facing the housing issue, will have more issue. Will you guys work with the other department, housing department, to resolve the issue before you implement this plan?
So one thing I was going to say, council member, thank you for that. We're keenly aware at city planning of the housing shortage in the city. And I think it's like an extremely important point that you bring up. While I don't think we anticipate serious losses of residential caused by allowing second floor commercial, I think it is a valid concern to bring up. The point of our following text amendment, City of Yes for Housing Opportunity, is to address a lot of the sort of the issues that we see in zoning preventing more housing from being built. So while we are with this text amendment trying to sort of concentrate specifically on cultivating economic opportunity and expanded opportunities for small businesses to locate and grow in our commercial corridors, we are very, very much looking in our next text amendment, which is coming out in the spring, to make sure that a lot of the housing issues, especially the constraints caused by zoning, are going to be like looked at and changed. So again, that's like a really serious concern, Laura. I don't know if you have anything to add, but City of Yes for Housing Opportunity, as I'm sure you'll hear tons about, is exactly about that. Traffic. That is something where, as far as parking, like commercial parking, that's up to an employer to provide, or a store to provide if they're able to. We are not looking to increase the amount of parking that commercial establishments have to provide, or residential for that matter. But I don't have a fantastic answer on that. I do think that allowing for more businesses If they are going to provide parking, that's an option that they have, but it's not something that we're trying to sort of deeply encourage right now.
I have one more question. When we have more traffic, we'll have more people to come in, and then will we increase the number of police patrolling in the neighborhood? The crime rate definitely gonna increase. The littering in the community definitely increase. Will we increase the number of sanitation workers?
So I think those are good questions. And I think that for NYPD and DSNY can answer that. But one thing, I do want to just say with this is, we think that not only is there the police presence is one mode of public safety, but also there are a lot of natural ways where eyes on the street, cultivating active commercial corridors. We don't want to see like lots of vacancies on streets and less people in streets. We want to see lots of people on the street, eyes on the street, community members who can look out for one another. I totally hear what you're saying as far as enforcement from NYPD and DSNY, but I also do want to say that we think that having active storefronts in neighborhoods that people can use is in its own small way, another way of cultivating active neighborhoods that we hope are safer as well. But no, it's a good question. Council member, I'm happy to go with you. I'll give your office a call and we're happy to come out.
Only after I drag him to 62nd Street to answer Urban Air. Thank you, council member, and congratulations. And we look forward to having you attend our meetings of the board. Was there one last question back there? Julia, and then Gabino, if I could, I guess I've got three here on Jeremy's side as well. It'd be quick. Go ahead, Julie.
All right, there it goes. Thanks. Hi, my name is Julia, new member to the Land Use and Landmarks Subcommittee. So I look forward to meeting many of you. I lived on 30th Street for 10 years and now I'm in Windsor Terrace. I appreciate the intent of the policy and I do hope many of the outcomes you outlined for smaller businesses, can be an outcome of this and cutting some of the red tape. I do agree with many of the comments that our neighbors have made tonight in terms of, kind of commingling of some of the more noxious uses and some of the bad actors. And as a parent of 2 kids on foot a lot, I think just the conflict between people and traffic and trucks and deliveries is a real big issue. And as our streets get more and more crowded, the kind of road rage has increased. And, I think it's just, I don't think DCP should just punt that to other agencies like, oh, that's DOT, that's DSNY. This really has to be a comprehensive city issue when such an enormous text amendment is put forth that's citywide and impacting so many communities, some of which might have even more tangible impacts than even Community Board 7, since there are such active corridors already. I just had a couple of questions just on the zoning specifically. Since the document is north of 1,100 pages, can you just confirm, are there any changes to use groups for residential purposes or community facilities? A lot of the language is kind of moved around the document, so it's hard to see where there's a change in any residential districts, like, as it relates to housing or community facilities. And I did see some language around transient hotels, if you could just confirm that.
Oh, Julia, I was going to say that's a great, very specific question that I'm gonna have to go in. My understanding with the actual use groups, there are changes to simplify a lot of what's allowed in the use groups. But as far as what is permitted in residential neighborhoods, aside from the things that I outlined, like the small, in-home businesses, and the potential permit for small corner stores in residential neighborhoods, there aren't fundamental changes, but there are some small ones, and we can make sure that we touch on them. And Laura, I don't know if you had any more than that. Okay. But if there are other things you were concerned about, again, the intent is not fundamentally changing what's permitted in residential neighborhoods, but there are some small new things that I touched on permitted. And yeah, so I'll leave it at that. But the hotels. As far as, so in some of our simplification of the districts, it is going to permit, I believe, transient hotels in some more of the commercial districts. That said, they require a special permit, right? So that's one where, unless I believe any hotel in New York City requires a special permit that goes through the ULURP process. So while it
Currently only in M1.
currently only in M1, I thought it was
M1 special permit.
M1. Is it just M1? Oh, okay. Well, I'm gonna have to look that up, but
Well, that's one of my list of items here that you'll have to get back.
hotels. Okay. I will get back on that. And I'll make sure that I know the extent of the special permit. That's a great question.
Yes, thank you. And actually, one other question, the screening requirement, or the street frontage, improvements, is that only for new businesses that are opening up?
Yeah.
Okay. And who would be responsible for enforcement? Is that DOB? I mean, there's a time of application, but then like 8 years later, they could seal up a window or something. Who's enforcing that?
Yeah, that's a great point. DOB obviously, when they're like filing their permits for the building, is responsible as far as then enforcement of sort of the street wall aspects. Later on, I'm not positive. I do think it's still DOB, but I'm not positive, and I can follow up on that. That's a good question.
All right, Gabino, can you do a quick question? Because I know Jeremy has.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I agree with, Councilmember Laura. Welcome to your councilship. Applause for that. So the same thing is happening on Fifth Avenue, that we have a population increase. So we want to make sure that we provide, safety nets and more, enforcement in our areas. Fifth Avenue has a lot of problems with traffic, and we understand that, just like Eighth Avenue. We travel through those corridors, and we just got to make sure we keep NYPD in check, make sure that they do their jobs in those areas. Traffic is an issue, and hopefully we could work together to make everything better for everybody. Thank you.
Fifth Avenue is a C1, C2 overlay, right? Fifth Ave, is that correct? Because there's a 5,000 square foot mini max space that has recently become empty. North side or west side. I'm just saying that if that became a Gorillas, right? And, it's got all those windows right in front, smack dab in the middle across from C-Town. I don't think we would like to see a Gorillas there from my point of view, but I mean, that could be possible as part of this proposal. They'd have big windows to see into whatever they would do to assemble the food, but it's not really, I think.
But also wouldn't necessarily be huge. It'll be limited to
5,000 square feet.
5,000 square feet.
Of Minimax.
Okay, that's fair.
All right. I apologize. Jeremy, a couple questions, then we'll definitely move to.
I have questions on 3 items. One is about, first one's about the last mile facilities. So this would allow up to 10,000 square feet on certain parts of Fifth Avenue, if I'm correct. First and second floor. Right, so 10,000 square feet. So, okay, so up to 15,000, so that's larger. And I heard that the distribution from these facilities would be from electric vehicles and bicycles. Is there anything in this that requires the distribution to be with electric vehicles and bicycles? Can they still go out by van?
In theory, they can, Jeremy.
Thank you.
Yeah.
In addition to that, the packages don't magically appear there. They will be delivered there, likely by the same trucks that are going to the giant facilities, which are 53 or 57 feet. So we will be adding additional huge trucks to these commercial corridors. Am I correct? That they would go to the facilities that exist already, get redistributed to these facilities, and then go out from there? So that seems like an extra step and an extra cost and an extra employees for these businesses. which I think would translate to extra costs for people who are purchasing. I wanted to also ask about what I will call the potential commercial intrusion in residential areas. My understanding is corner lots will be able to apply to have businesses if they are residential now to potentially be commercial. So is it possible I'm on 100% residential block and I find that my neighbor wants to put in a bar next to me or a weed distribution facility or an all-night tattoo parlor? Would all those things be allowed in the residential now?
I think though, well, in terms of,
We're advisory only.
well, come through the CPC and yeah, it is advisory. I think though that the corner store, it's just the corner stores and not in the mid block. But with that too, the intent, again, what is allowed at the mid block are the small in-home businesses. And what we can do, Jeremy, is make sure that we have like a list of the businesses to you of what's permitted in-home versus what would be permitted on the corners. And again, it's something where, I know in the Sunset Park rezoning, there is the desire to sort of see a lot of the commercial activity, like concentrating on the commercial corridors. And we believe that will still happen. But with some, maybe opening up of like a corner store, a small corner store, where there might not be as much local commercial service, but we can make sure to get those uses to you. And then one thing I did want to say to the previous question about the distribution facilities. I guess quick question, show of hands, like who here shops online ever? By show of hands. Yeah, ever. I mean, I do too. Like I ordered a book
All of us
recently.
do.
So
Keep going, keep going.
So, but my point is that, and Jeremy, I think you bring up a legit concern. But our intent here is to allow that last step, like these micro distribution facilities, if they're opening in Community District 7, are to get those last packages to people in Community District 7. And the idea, it's not perfect. There are trade-offs, but our thought here is to allow these facilities so that instead of, 10 or 15 vans going out and driving on the streets of Community District 7, maybe one of these micro distribution facilities is the recipient of, 5 of those vans, and that's one trip rather than a whole route. And then from that micro distribution facility, bikes, packages, or like, individual couriers, or even people, folks on their way home from the train can go to the facility to pick up their package. It's not perfect. There are trade-offs, but the reality is we also all order stuff, unfortunately. And the intent here is to open up some of the avenues to allow those last package, Amazon's hands to your hands, to our hands, to be on foot, to be by bike, and to reduce some of all of the trips having to be by van. So again, it's not mandated. We can't mandate what vehicle, but that's again, some of the intent here.
Lastly, with regard to commercial facilities allowed on upper floors of buildings, is it possible that if I'm on the 3rd floor, I could wake up one day and find out that there's a nightclub above me or a bowling alley?
I would say it's not possible. So the only way to operate a commercial use above a residential use through this proposal would be through separation and attenuation if it's a noisy activity. I don't think a bowling alley would be permitted as a right anyway. A nightclub would obviously require other types of permitting and would be subject to capacity constraints. What I do want to emphasize though is like the separation of uses is going to require a major sort of redesign of a building if it's going to happen. It's not likely to happen in an existing building that is presently occupied by commercial and residential uses already. It is going to require a separate entrance, a separate lobby, a separate elevator, a separate stairwell if it's not high enough to warrant an elevator. And so it's not the kind of thing where you can just wake up and find out that, your neighbor above you has vacated the place and the landlord has turned the room above you into like a restaurant or something. It really does require major building mitigations and construction. It's really, really not likely something that would happen to an existing building. You may find a new building that is specifically fit out to accommodate a mix of uses. We see this in Manhattan today, and they're purpose-built. The uses within the building may change, but they have to stay, commercial space has to remain a commercial space, the residential space has to remain a residential space. You're not going to get the commingling that I think a lot of people are afraid of. It's also sort of worth reminding everybody that the way New York City is built today, the way we have dense neighborhoods, you have buildings adjacent to other buildings. You may have a residential building that's adjacent to an office building. There are thick walls that sort of keep those uses separate lobbies. That is functionally what we are going to be allowing within one building, but it will not read as one building for the occupants because of the separation requirements, the separate entrances, et cetera. So I hear the concerns certainly, and I would absolutely be alarmed if I could, I'm on the 4th floor of a walk-up, if even my downstairs neighbor could like turn that into a restaurant. That's not at all where we're going with this.
I do also just want to stress that aside, there is the idea that there can be second floor commercial, but as far as the sort of split buildings with, let's say, a commercial use on the 5th floor above residential is limited to the C4 and higher districts, which is that small box here. Laura, if you want to point it out, it's that portion of, I believe, 5th Avenue. So it is not in all residential districts. It is not in the vast majority of Community Board 7, but it is constrained to small portions of commercial districts.
Only if, well, subject to like rental protection also, but only if they were to renovate the building to make it compliant. To be clear, there are places in the city where we allow this today, and we do not see the conversion of residential uses to commercial uses. So the idea that you may live in a 5-story building and there's a ground floor of commercial with 4 floors above, it's a very common building prototype. We have districts today where you are allowed to have a 2nd-story commercial use today as of right. They're not being touched, as far as this component of the proposal goes. We simply don't see it. 2nd floor commercial space is not particularly high value. Everybody wants to be on the ground floor. That's where you draw the, window shoppers and where people can get to easily. You have to make the 2nd floor ADA compliant. It really requires a lot of work. If you have a tenant in place, you have a stream of income. It's just not sort of a scenario that we have seen play out anywhere in the city. So I understand the concerns of residential displacement, but where we allow it today, we don't see it. And we really wouldn't be doing this if we thought that there was a great likelihood of residents being displaced from their homes where they are today, so that a tax office could operate on the 2nd floor with all of the work that it would entail in the existing building. And then also to put in a plug for housing opportunity, we are an extremely pro-housing moment right now, and we are doing a lot to expand housing opportunities across the city. We will be back in front of this community board presumably many times later this year to talk about that, but it's exciting to hear.
Thanks, Laura. We're way beyond time. Jerry, if you could just hold on.
I would appreciate that. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so I apologize, members of the public. It's so late, but I do want to afford some time if you have any questions on this proposal. Yes, sir.
Or I guess this is addressed to you, because in 2002, I was projects organizer for the DOE, and we did a mapping of the NYCHA houses for green spaces with the Police Athletic League, Gaia Institute, and the Green Mapping Association, and there were already precious few trees and green spaces given the density of children and population. I'm concerned that taking any space away from those properties and those houses to build any kind of thing other than something that's useful for the quality of life who live inside of them is problematic, and probably would not be very popular with the people inside the houses.
So I think that's a, legitimate concern. My other community board is Community District 16, Brownsville, Ocean Hill, which, as I'm sure you're familiar with, has probably the highest concentration of public housing in the United States. Again, they're very large campuses. There is actually more green space on the campuses probably than your average NYCHA resident has access to a lot, at least on the Brownsville houses campuses or Van Dyke, quite a bit of green space. The intent is not to see all of that green space become, a supermarket or something, but there is the idea of, and actually I'm working on another project where residents have actually asked to allow more commercial uses just to, again, have small entrepreneurship opportunities on their campuses. But I guess maybe my point here is that we don't anticipate huge shopping malls popping up in NYCHA, and what this proposal allows is not that. It is modest additions of commercial on residential campuses that sometimes you actually do see in some of our residential campuses across the city. But I guess the point is that it's limited and that we don't anticipate, nor are we permitting all of the green space, and which you are correct is very important, but all of the green space to just be immediately taken up with other uses.
And it looks like it's also a CPC approval with community board and environmental review as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it's a CPC authorization that gives NYCHA and other large-scale residential sites the ability to include commercial up to 15,000 square feet, subject to both environmental review and community board approval. And again, 15,000 square feet on what are massive, massive campuses, and that's the cap. But again, that's a legitimate concern, but we are not permitting all of NYCHA campuses to become sort of commercial. But I do think, I would push back a little to say that I imagine there are some residents who might want access to a small store or, of some sort on their campus, and it's not one universal monolith of what people want and don't want.
It's about the size. You're like speaking about a NYCHA campus when we refer to it as a NYCHA campus? We typically, this is a good question. I don't know whether we actually define it, but we typically refer to a campus as sort of above a certain size threshold for a lot. They're typically super blocks, so where you may have a sort of traditional street grid of 200-foot long, between street to street or across the avenues. Historically, I think when NYCHA was doing a lot of construction, they would build over the existing street grid, and so you'd end up with these super blocks. Tower in the Park is the style you tend to see. So these are buildings that are built to not to sort of quality housing bulk. They're towers with a lot of green spaces. There's like an open space ratio. So it's not a style that we promote today.
I'd say I call it a campus because there are lots of buildings and there's lots of green space and it's a big unit. So I'm like, it's a campus.
If we could move on, because honestly, CB7 doesn't have any NYCHA campuses in our entire district. But I recognize the question. We have several people on Zoom that want to get in as well. And I do want to get the vote. I would like to try and attempt a vote tonight on.
Jeremy Kaplan.
Yeah, one thing that just peeked out to me was the discussion on Fifth Avenue and the C4s, that a lot of those buildings are rent stabilized. And I just heard you say subject to tenant protections. What is protecting tenants, basically, or landlord, from taking off those rent stabilized units and turning them to commercial under this current zoning changes? Because those Fourth or Fifth Avenue rent stabilized units are some of the most affordable units in Sunset Park and, essential housing that we have. So
Jeremy, sorry, go ahead.
How is this not a new mechanism then we just passed a law to not, to prevent combining of rent stabilized units? How would this not be sort of another mechanism now for landlords to get rid of rent stabilized units by turning them into commercial units? on the higher floors?
I can. Well, I think this comes down, I hear what you're saying, and I think one thing broadly as far as if you own a property currently in a commercial district, and you want to, if you're the owner of the property of current like rental tenants and you want to just build an office building there, the zoning, if the building you're trying to build is permitted under the zoning that exists currently, you're, I think, able to demolish your building and rebuild a new building, again, if it's your property. And not that I or city planning wants to see that, but that is kind of the reality of what does exist. If you, have a building on, in this, or like a parcel of land that has a residential building on it and you want to build commercial and it is zoned commercial, you are in theory able to do that. But again, the point is that we don't anticipate that happening because again, as you see now in the current commercial districts, if there is such a strong demand for, let's say, office use, like a 5-story office building in that corridor, or some sort of 5-story commercial building, we would anticipate seeing that now. What this is more about is if there is, a vacancy that is sort of unfillable. And to be honest, I mean, especially for what I think are really important units, like the vacancy level for units $1,500 or below, I think is hovering at something like 1% right now. It's really dire. But the point is that we don't anticipate commercial overtaking residential. And if there is some sort of, the intent is really to allow sort of empty spaces to be filled, not for commercial to overtake residential. And it is something where if, unfortunately, I think if commercial demand was so strong in a given area currently that is zoned commercial, likely, the market would dictate that it gets built commercial. So that's, not a perfect answer, but again, kind of the intent of what we're going for with that provision that allows for building on different floors.
Okay, thank you, Jeremy. Next.
Jorge Muniz Reyes. Jorge, you could unmute yourself.
Hey, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, neighbors. Good evening, planning commission members. I had 2 questions. The first, you just laid out 18 proposals to help certain kinds of businesses grow. But am I correct? I think I saw something in the news that you guys also have another proposal. I guess that would be a 19th proposal to let casinos into the manufacturing and certain commercial districts. So if you could just clarify that, if that's also the case, and if it is, when you plan to talk about that with the community and this community board in particular. And then lastly, it's, as some of my neighbors have pointed out in the chat, this seems to be a plan to promote certain industries. You mentioned, nightlife, clubs, seems like weed shops, micro distribution centers. So can I ask where the source is for these industries being the ones that we really need to be uplift right now? Is there some kind of study you guys did? Is it from another data source? Could you just say how the industries were selected that were the ones that you say are the ones growing and that we need to incentivize? So those are my questions. Thanks.
Hi, Jorge, it's John Fontillis. Regarding the casino text amendment, that is a separate application that just came into the board. It's not tied together with this application, the City of Yes. But I believe we're going to bring it up at the board meeting next week. So certainly you can comment on it at that time. It's not tied together with this. We are concerned, Julio, our board chair, is concerned that we're getting all these disparate text amendments at the end of the year. I'm not sure what you guys are doing down there, but
Or at the beginning of the year now.
Well, yeah, but I mean, it's like, several different items are coming through in different ways. So, Jorge, we are intending to have a discussion about that as soon as we can understand the text and distribute that to the board.
Now, I also do want to clarify, the casino special permit, which I'm not an expert on, my understanding currently is that it's tied to three very specific is it four or five very specific state approved proposals. And I do not believe any of those are located in Community Board 7. But I'm happy to, follow up on that.
All right, and can you just address his question
Oh.
about certain industries? How were they?
The emerging industries?
That's a good question. Juki, are you speaking specifically about sort of like emerging industries and life sciences, or I know Juki in walking through the proposal sort of cited certain industries that may want to operate on a local commercial street that may not be able to today, light manufacturing, maybe furniture repair or a ceramic studio. Those are just examples. We're talking sort of a wide variety of light industrial uses as they are classified today that cannot operate on a local commercial corridor. These are places that people want to go. They're actually fun to look in the window. They sort of attract a more sort of retail. They create a more retail environment than I think they did in the past. And so today, we've talked about sort of the mixing of uses. What is a light industrial use versus a commercial use? And I think those distinctions are blurring in today's economy. They're blurring in the way people sort of interact with businesses themselves. You can go to a paint your own pot studio, but you can't actually make your own pot. And so these are the industries that I think we think are good examples of the ways that, everyday New Yorkers sort of relate to the types of industrial uses that we want to allow on our local retail streets or local commercial corridors. I don't know, though, I apologize if that sort of is speaking to the uses that you were talking about are incentivizing. We're not proposing to incentivize any use, but we're trying to sort of even the playing field for the variety of uses that I think we know want to open up on local commercial streets.
Okay, thank you, Jorge. There's one question here. Yes, sir, go ahead.
Good evening. My name is Kevin Garcia. I'm the transportation planner with the New York City Environmental Justice Alliance, and we are also part of the Last Mile Coalition along with Uprose here. I guess I have two very quick questions and then one comment. I guess my first question is, will DCP release the scope of work in preparation of a draft EIS for the City of Yes for Economic Opportunity? I know there was one that was released for the City of Yes for housing, but there wasn't one for City of Yes for carbon neutrality, or one that was for this one, or at least it wasn't released publicly. And I guess, can you explain very briefly how the department came to a negative declaration for the EAS? And then my comment very quickly is more for the board. As part of the Last Mile Coalition, NEJA is concerned about the oversight in the current proposal, particularly in the context of last mile warehouses and their impacts on, Community Board 7 and communities of color across the city. We believe that addressing the challenges posed by the rapid rise of e-commerce is crucial for fostering vibrant neighborhoods and supporting the economic recovery of New York City. But this proposal by DCP introduces the micro distribution facilities, but it falls short of addressing the significant land use conflicts stemming from the clustering of last mile warehouses, as mentioned earlier. And to rectify this, we do urge the board to, to urge DCP, as they did in the City of Yes for carbon neutrality, to incorporate a specific text amendment defining last mile warehouses as a distinct category to complement the micro distribution facilities and establish a special permit process. And this omission would, really stand out in light of, City of Yes's stated objectives. Thank you.
So could you answer the first question about the scope of work?
So this is an environmental this only requires an environmental assessment statement as opposed to City of Yes for housing opportunity, which is an environmental impact statement. So we are not, there is no scope of work associated with an EAS, which is what this proposal is and which is what carbon neutrality was.
And can you explain how a neg deck was arrived on for the EAS?
Think, and so I haven't worked on the environmental for this project, and that's in our environmental review division. But it's basically the seeker, basically the sort of set of environmental laws that govern review. There's like all of this kind of categories that the environmental review goes through and just sort of checks off one or the other, like in what is like legally mandated as far as EAS review. And what we arrived at, I guess, was the negative declaration there. Again, wasn't part of the exact environmental review for this project. But it's something where it's a sort of a very standard process. The EAS is like, and the seeker manual is a public document that anyone can review, and that's sort of the criteria of the text amendment were reviewed against it. And it is, and it's something that obviously oftentimes seeker is subject to lawsuits. So it's something that our team went through meticulously and looked at sort of what do we have to check off on this legally mandated environmentally review form. And that's what we did, I presume, to arrive at our negative declaration.
And if I could just add a little bit to that, I think it's such a technical document, but the fact that we were able to arrive to a neg deck conclusion and disclose no impacts speaks to the sort of simplicity of what we are actually trying to do here. We're not inducing development. We are not opening up new neighborhoods to noxious uses that, they're not exposed to today. We're really trying to accommodate today's economy in the way that we see businesses wanting to function today, in the ways we see residents wanting their economy to function, small business owners, where they want to operate, how they want to operate. We are all residents of New York City. I feel very comfortable with this proposal happening in my neighborhood, in my backyard, in my city. This is designed not to induce vast amounts of new office buildings or new industrial buildings or new commercial buildings. It's really about making sure that we're using our limited space wisely, making sure that there's flexibility for the host of small businesses that want to operate on a local retail corridor, for the variety of larger businesses that we know want to be here, but that can't fit into our zoning. And so they end up in an M district where we really didn't design our M3 districts to be, bounce parks, trampoline parks. We want the industrial uses to go there, but when you don't have a space for the amusements that people are trying to look for in their neighborhood, they go to sort of the margins where they are allowed. As Juki has said, nothing is ever going to be perfect when it comes to planning in New York City. We're incredibly dense. We're trying to accommodate a lot of different uses and users. But we really don't see this as a proposal that is going to sort of set off alarm bells across the environmental review spectrum. Noise, air quality, traffic, urban design, there's 24 some different categories that have to be assessed. And in the aggregate, these are really small but meaningful, I think, as far as sort of everyday shoppers and residents and businesses go.
Kevin, I also want to say we noted your comment on defining last mile, the use group. Were you at the BP's hearing on?
Yeah.
Alex, our director in Brooklyn office, came in and said Kevin from EJ made a great comment about the use groups. Again, it's something we need to work on, but point taken, and it's a really, valuable comment that we appreciate. So I just want to say that.
I would hope you cite him in the footnotes. Is that
Well, you're in my notes already.
Kevin item is listed. Okay.
Almost there. Matt, can I follow up? Okay. I don't want to take up too much time because I know people, want to vote. But my name is Nebraska Hernandez. As Kevin mentioned, I'm also a part of the Last Mile Coalition via UpRose, which is a community-based organization here located in Sunset Park. Just want to second everything Kevin had stated. And I know you had mentioned, we all do online shop. We all, get our packages through Amazon, UPS, USPS, FedEx, whatever. But as of right now, we're not all feeling the impacts. Low income communities of color, we mapped it, Sunset Park, Red Hook, Hunts Point, Maspeth are all disproportionately impacted by these last mile facilities. So yes, we need that text amendment there.
Great, thank you very much. All right, if I could, I know we're way over time. I appreciate Land Use Committee hanging in there. before you all keel over. I would like to ask, I have a couple of notes here. Make sure you guys come back with a couple of clarifications. I have under auto repair, we've confirmed that is a BSA special permit. Okay, good. You'll confirm whether or not the racial and equity report is required for the zoning text amendment. Discussion about car dealerships, making sure that the repair shop safety plan also includes those types of uses. There is a question on the effect on taxes. I don't know if you can get a straight answer out of DOF, but I would ask you to try. Agriculture, what is it? Is it just the 3-plant rule, or is there some other definition that we can appeal to? Transient hotels, making sure that we understand that in terms of the special permit. And then can you confirm if the enforcement of the street wall urban design requirement is really at DOB? I believe those are all the items I've had, unless anybody, was there any other question that you want them to return back with an answer for?
Yeah.
Regulations that would govern in-home occupations are up to 49% of the interior square footage of your home. No more than 3 employees, including yourself, I believe. And all goods sold must be produced on site. Those are pretty big limiting factors because it's very hard to sell things that you make in your home. You are sort of limited there. I don't think we're going to be able to come up with a list of all of the different types of things that one can make in their home and sell. Services, Juki mentioned hair cutting, things that require additional permits will still require additional permits. You can't start brewing your own alcohol and making it on site and selling it. You can't operate a nightclub for a variety of reasons, presumably because it takes up more than 49% of your home and has more than 3 employees. And also has like noise implications, and you'd need to do the attenuating and everything else.
But Laura, you could have a house, a typical brownstone house here in this district right next door to us. You could have, it's a 3-story house. You could have 1.5 floors, the ground floor plus half of the stoop floor, turn into a barbershop, a bakery, you could have multiple home-based businesses.
Still be limited to the employee cap. So you could have a barber shop, a 3-story brownstone is, I don't know, 6,000 square feet. You could, in that example, have a 3,000 square foot hair cutting sort of establishment, but you could only have 3 barbers.
But if I had a haircutting, a barber shop and a bakery on the ground floor, is it 3 employees total?
Total, yeah. A list of businesses that we would expect. I think I can rattle a few off the top of my head because we saw this this came out of the pandemic, this sort of suggestion. We have home occupations that are permitted today through zoning. They have a racially motivated past where we didn't allow things like barbershops. We did allow things like psychotherapist offices, right? So we allow some people to work from home and have people coming into their homes, and we don't allow others.
Well, if I could, can you just come back with the list?
Well, okay, so the things that we saw, we did see like making cookies from your house and selling them. We saw sort of like Etsy shops where people are making bracelets or necklaces, stuff like that. Hair cutting is a good example. We can come up with a longer list, but just to give you a sense, Etsy is where we go in our. We could do that too. yeah. There's a lot of uses in a city as diverse as New York, but we will do our best to.
Well, the
try to
truth
give
is
you-
everything now is not allowed, right? Mostly not allowed. So I think the uses is the change is what would be allowed. So I think it would be, from my point of view, better to know what would be allowed. Very quick, John. So the question is, does DCP have a list of entrepreneurs who've requested these use changes or? Any local people in CB7 that you've been contacted by?
And I don't have it on the top of my head, but yes.
Okay. Again, 10 to 9. I appreciate everyone staying here. What I'd like to do is there are 18 proposals. I will say, I hope 10 of them are actually relatively simple. But you know, we'll go through. And then I know there are some that are much more complicated, and honestly, I think maybe let's vote on the ones that we can, and if we really feel like we need to expand the discussion, maybe pick that up during. Oh, I'm sorry. The official? All right, thank you. All right. So out of the 18, first one, number one was lift time limits to reactivating vacant storefronts. This is the idea that if a storefront went vacant for 2 years, you would not be able to reopen that storefront. If I am saying that correctly, I think this change would allow somebody to come back in and open up that storefront if it was a storefront previously beyond the 2-year time period. And this, I think, is expressly to address some issues that happened during the pandemic where businesses have gone out of business, but the storefront's still there. It just hasn't been leased, that somebody could reopen a business in there. I would hope that that's not controversial. I'll just pause there and see if anyone thinks that's an issue. John? Yeah.
Very brief. I'm just saying this as a community member of the Economic Development Committee. The new chair is here, Damaris. I think that it's very important for the committee. This is the first time that that committee has seen this proposal. We don't have the document. I understand the proposal was discussed at a previous land use meeting, but I think it's very important that the committee discuss it in session. If the committee still has quorum, I don't know if economic development still has quorum, but if so, this is actually the first time in almost a calendar year that that committee has still had quorum at the time a vote was taken. So I would love to hear the chair's thoughts on this. I think she has extremely relevant experience and could comment on this. I would love to hear the other committee members talking about this, and I think that's very important for that committee to do. So I don't feel comfortable voting on any of these matters. Can we vote present or just abstain as voting members?
Well, look,
I'm just
No, I understand.
just for my position within that committee, based on the committee's history and its current status, I would like to vote present or abstain and ask the committee to reconvene so it could take a vote, write a letter. I understand you're trying to get a vote, but the full board, but.
Well, I mean, truth be told, as you know, I mean, I think you would know, I do not want to try and rush things. In fact, we spent 1.5 years on Industry City. So if the committees feel that this is something they want to review more, certainly can do that. I was hoping that we could get land use as the vehicle to try and at least get some of these things through. But if the collective feeling from the 3 committees is that you need more time to review, I'm certainly open to that. Again, as vice chair, I'm also not really the person to ask.
As transportation chair, so the vote tonight, the thinking was land use. Land use was meant to take a vote on it. They hadn't. And we wanted to bring more of the committees together, which is why economic development and transportation join land use. It's about getting more people to come and engage. And I also help hit quorum which is also what we were able to do so that we were able to formally call the meeting to order. So I mean, the intention behind this was to be able to have land as you did as we have in other positions where there's zoning text amendments, that the land use committee is the one who's taking the vote.
Yes, I mean, we're the ones that receive the application and by the bylaws executes the community boards during committee. Now, I mean, we have extended this the additional month. We are up against a hard deadline with city planning taking their vote in early February. So, and again, what we would issue would be a letter, either approve or disapprove or condition on each one of the items, and that could take place, you know, at any time, right? We don't even really have to vote as a committee on it. It's just that, you know, typically we would vote it out of committee, so the board would have honestly a shorthand, so they could see that, you know, significant number of members of the board have already reviewed it and take that under advisement in their vote essentially next week. We are against that time limit. So I certainly think we could, you know, give everybody a week to talk this through if you want, and then put it up during the full board. However, I mean, we've already spent 2 hours on it. I don't think we really want to have yet another 2-hour time period during the board meeting. So I'm really just, I'm kind of just verbally, you know, spewing out all the different things that are in my brain, but
So just like there's time and energy, and there's only so much time and energy and for getting people to show up. We had this a second time because we all showed up at the last board meeting and land use hadn't taken a vote. There hadn't been a vote, and that was the idea behind it. So people are here now for almost 3 hours. And I think it would be important and prudent to encourage land use to take some kind of, you know, recommendations on the proposals.
yeah, and I mean, if land use does do that tonight, it doesn't preclude more discussion by the board next week. After that.
Are we expecting the full board to vote on each of the 18?
If that's what we believe as a committee we are going to do, yeah, we would then require the full board to vote on each one of the proposals. I mean, honestly, because I'm trying to recognize that some of these may be, you know, difficult for the board to swallow. I mean, honestly, I really don't think we're gonna approve second floor commercial activity from my point of view. Because I think it's just loaded with a lot of issues relative to housing, Fifth Avenue, 8th Avenue, that sort of thing. But, you know, the board could surprise us, and full board may say that they don't feel anything wrong with it. And it's really the full board's vote on it that counts. Okay, any, Damaris, I mean, if, as the other board chair, I mean, is that something that you want to weigh in on as well?
I'm exhausted. So anything you say at this point, for me to vote would be so unfair because I wouldn't know what the heck I'm voting for because I'm so exhausted. But I mean, the hours that we spent here was really worth it because then I got to listen as opposed to all the reading that I've been doing. And as far as businesses on the second floor, somebody that has a little small business office, and I deal with all these small businesses, they are everywhere. You'd be surprised where people are building inside their apartments. Okay. And the things that I hear that come across me, and it's a lot of small businesses. I mean, my fear is that the zoning would bring in bigger businesses, and then the small businesses will be out. I don't agree with the whole second floor thing, especially also in the corners. I mean, there's a lot of things that and I'm for business and I'm for economic development. I was a relationship manager for many years. A lot of those people, those factories, and some that moved out on 1st, 2nd Avenue were my clients. So I completely understand. I don't like the idea. When you say 5th Avenue, I was lost. I don't have the map, so I don't know what part of 5th Avenue. So Yeah, I mean, it's your committee, but I'm gonna have to probably agree with John and Antoinette, and I think the Economic Development Committee hasn't really met. These people don't know me. We haven't really had discussions on anything, and I think we need to, schedule a meeting, catch up, see where everything else was left off, and then when we come to these meetings, they'll be more productive.
Okay, any other board members want to weigh in on this? This is really a process question. Gabino? All right, let me do this. Let's do just a show of hands for each one of the items. Let me just list them out. Yes. Let's do that. And I just want to see if we feel like some of these are controversial or if we have unanimity. At least that's a little bit of information we can take to the board next week. Okay. So the first one was lift time limits on reactivating vacant storefronts. Those who would be in favor on the land use committee on this, please raise your hand. Yes. Any, okay, thank you. No's, abstentions. Okay. So that sounds non-controversial. I'm going to skip number 2, which is simplifying rules for business types. Actually, no, this one is a rejiggering of the use list, correct? So right now we have 17 separate categories. You were trying to reduce that down to 10. In other words, putting some uses in more broader categories. From my point of view, I don't think that's that much of an issue, but let me put it out there. So the proposal would simplify zoning regulations to permit the same range of commercial businesses on similar commercial street types, consolidating use differences between 2 kinds of zoning districts for neighborhood commercial corridors and local streets, C1 and C2. This is what you're talking about earlier, versus use differences among the 4 kinds of zoning districts for centrally located areas and central business districts, C4, C5, C6, and C7. I think primarily for Sunset Park, it's really rationalizing the C1, C2. This was the issue with Juki saying that you could do a tax office on one side of the street, you can't because of the difference between C1 and C2. The only big issue here is we do have a C4 on Fifth Avenue, and that's a little bit of a more complicated thing because those uses are more expansive. But let me just do a quick check. So those who would be in approval of simplifying the rules for business types allowed on commercial streets, those who would vote yes, raise hands. Thank you. Any that would be no or abstain? Okay. Well, I mean, we're talking, for example, C1, C2, there's not a lot of difference between that. But you're saying anything that has to do with noise, trash. Okay, I'm not sure exactly what that text would be, but let's, again, in a way, I'm just trying to do a temperature check on each one of these items. If you can give some thought to that next week, we can bring it up to the board. Okay. The next one was expand opportunities for small scale clean production. This is allowing things like bakeries, dressmaking, tailoring, hat making in other districts. And this was what you were talking about in terms of the 5,000 square foot rule for the ground floor in C1, C2, 10,000 square feet in C4, C5. But it does, the intent here is to add these more, retail-ish uses in the current districts, residential districts, and I'm sorry, commercial districts that are only now allowed in M districts. So, anybody who is in favor of that, please raise your hand. Anybody who would be against that? Anyone? Okay. Modernizing loading dock rules so buildings can adapt over time. I believe, Brady, you guys are in agreement with this one. Right, so I just wanted to put that out there because this really affects most of the loading bay issues in our industrial district, but it would remove the requirement of providing additional loading berths for a change in use in an existing building, as Laura had talked briefly about. So all those in favor of this item? Okay, any in for no? Okay. Let me take the temperature of enabling commercial activity on upper floors. This is number 5. So in C1, C2, C3 districts would allow commercial uses on the second story of all mixed buildings. And that's the real operator there because it has to be a building that has separation, right? And that the commercial uses have to have their own separate entrance. And that's, in the low density districts. In the higher density districts, C4, C5, C6, would allow commercial users to occupy separate parts of the same story or locate above the residences. That's the key difference between the two. In the lower density C1, C2, it could be on the second story. In C4, C5, C6, it could be above residences. Let me take the temperature. Those in favor of this provision, please raise your hand. Those not in favor? Okay. Number 6, I think is simple. It's simplifying and modernizing the way businesses are classified in zoning. This is about use groups, creating the 10 use groups of what is permitted in each one of those classifications. So, for example, moving prisons, which are allowed in 8 separate districts, to only be in 1 district. Distilleries are currently only allowed in M3. This would allow them in other districts. However, they would have to be regulated by the FDNY and other agencies. All right, I know that's brief, but those who are in favor of allowing the simplification, modernizing the way businesses are classified in zoning, raise your hand. Those who are not in favor? Okay. All right. Clarifying rules to permit indoor agriculture. This is number 7. Some uses can have outdoor components. The proposal would allow indoor agriculture in commercial districts. I don't think we can vote on this because we need a definition of what the agriculture is. So we will wait for that one. Number 8, give life science companies more certainty to grow, which is really simplifying the use definition of a laboratory. I don't know if we have a lot of those in our community board, but yeah. Oh, Brooklyn Gamer. Okay. All right. Well, this is focused on simplifying the use definition of laboratory to codify its current interpretation. would allow commercial laboratories to co-locate with hospitals and universities. Those in favor of this proposal, please raise your hand. Those not in favor? Okay. Number 9, support nightlife with common sense rules with dancing and live entertainment. Today, eating and drinking establishments are allowed without a zoning defined capacity limitation. The change would be to allow restaurants and bars to host musical entertainment, the old cabaret requirement, provided the business capacity is limited to 200 persons or fewer. Dancing is not permitted. Eating and drinking establishments hosting non-musical entertainment must apply for BSA special permit. And again, dancing is not permitted. When can you dance? This is essentially putting the restriction on capacity for bars and restaurants that are serving food and drink and shows, right? Yeah, you can't dance anywhere. That's the cabaret problem. I think there's some once you have to like regular. I can. All right, so we'll come back on that one. 10, creating more opportunities for amusements to locate. Proposal will consolidate existing amusement uses into categories based on whether the business operates in the building or outside. Current zoning categorizes uses differently. This would create a particular use group that's related to outdoor versus indoor, and that would be codified into certain districts. And there's a size limitation, 10,000 square feet in C1, C2. Outdoor amusements are a completely different animal. So the question is, are we in favor of creating more opportunities for amusements to locate? Now that I'm saying this is our problem with urban air. So if I'm going to table this one to come back. 11, enable entrepreneurship with modern rules for home-based businesses. This proposal would modernize regulations for home-based businesses, referred to as home occupations. This is a way that allows many kinds of businesses to occur in the home. And the current zoning resolution allows home occupations such as law offices or music instruction, but explicitly restricts others such as barbershops, interior decorator offices, or advertising or public relation agencies. So this is the issue of it would limit to a maximum of 25% of the size of dwelling unit or 500 square feet, whichever is less. And home businesses must not produce any noise, smoke, dust, particulate matter, odor, or any other nuisance. And that actually, I think, Cabino would be the text that we would want for the other one. Yes, the proposal would be 49% of the floor area and maximum of 3 employees. All right, those in favor of allowing entrepreneurship with modern rules for home-based businesses? Those not in favor? Okay. That's number 11. Number 12, introduce corridor design rules that ensure buildings contribute to the surroundings. This is the issue about transparency and urban design, not covering up windows, quality of streetscape, promoting a lively, engaging pedestrian experience, blank walls like visual interest. So for new buildings, there's a tiered approach to streetscape regulations. Tier A for C1, C2, parking lots must be placed on the side and rear of the building. No drive-throughs except by BSA permit. Tier B for C1, C2 would be both tier A rules, but active uses with transparency required at grade. I'm sorry, this is also for C4 through C7. Maximum lobby length of 50 feet. Parking must be completely enclosed and no curb cuts for parking or loading berths if there's frontage on another street. Tier C is for special purpose districts only. All right, those in favor of these urban design rules in these districts, as I mentioned, active uses, transparency, et cetera, those in favor of that? Okay, those not in favor? Okay. Number 13 is auto repair shops. I'm going to table that to get the information next week. Number 14, encourage safe and sustainable deliveries with micro distribution. I'm also going to table this one because there seems to be quite a bit of discussion about that. Okay, last ones. 15, facilitate local commercial space on residential campuses. Again, we do not have any in CB7, but I guess philosophically, do members of this board or this committee feel that we should facilitate local commercial space on a campus? Okay, those not in favor? Number 16, create a process for allowing corner stores in residential areas. A pathway for new neighborhood serving businesses. This would be a CPC, City Planning Commission authorization to allow up to 2,500 square feet of retail service or office uses or weed shops or.
If it was licensed by the state, very hard to get that license.
Any business, provided that the commercial storefront is located within 100 feet from an intersection. So it really only applies to corners. Those in favor of allowing this new process to allow for corner stores, raise your hand. Those not in favor? 17, almost there. Rationalize waiver process for business adaptation and growth. Rationalize and supplement existing discretionary zoning tools to address gaps that prevent businesses a path to expand or adapt. We honestly did not talk about this, I don't think. I'm going to hold on this one. Lastly, create, number 18, create new kinds of zoning districts for future job hubs. This is primarily in the manufacturing district, although there is a new C7 district with a 2 to 15 FAR. I don't think that's going to be mapped in our neighborhood. But we do have a statement from Brady from Southwest Brooklyn that we can incorporate. You have some tweaks that you would like to see on these M districts. So we can distribute that as well. I believe you're in support of this with the tweaks. So there's some conditions, right? So let me put it to the committee, creating new kinds of zoning districts, primarily in the M district for future job hubs. There are some incentives, some increase in FAR in order to do that. Those in favor? Those not? Abstain? Okay. To what? All right. Yes. All right, let me just recap. Again, I really do appreciate you staying so late. Number one, it seemed to be an approval committee. Oh, okay, great. Number two, simplify rules for business types on commercial street. That was also approved, except we need to add a text condition about business noise and trash. Number three, expand opportunities for small scale clean production, also passed. Number four, modernizing loading dock rules so buildings can adapt over time. That passed, although we have a there's one condition that Southwest Brooklyn would like to add. Number 5, enable commercial activities on upper floors. I held on this one. That we'll need to discuss this. Did we? Oh, I'm sorry, that's number 5, right? Okay, I'm sorry. Yes, this is a no. We did not approve this one. Right. 6 is, yes. So I got that mixed up. 7, rules about indoor agriculture, I held on that one. 8, is life sciences, more certainty to grow, is yes. 9, nightlife, we held. 10, which is amusements, we're waiting for, we need to come back on this one. I held on this one. Yes. 11, modern rules for home-based businesses, we voted yes on this. 12, quarter design rules, we voted yes on that. 13, conflicts between auto repair shops and pedestrians, I held on this. Number 14, encourage safe and sustainable development with micro distribution, also, that was a hold. 15, facilitate local commercial space on residential campuses, that was a yes. 16, creating a process for corner stores, also yes. 17, waiver process for business adaptation and growth, that was a hold. And then 18 is a yes. This is zoning changes to manufacturing for future job hubs. All right, so out of the 18, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, we're in the yes category. The committee voted to advance those to yes. We have 2, actually I only have 1 no. Is that correct? Yes, 1 no, which is number 5, which was commercial activity on upper floors. And then the balance of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 items we hold. I held it back for the full committee. So if you all are okay with this, I could write this up as 11 out of the 18, the committee voted to recommend for approval. That 1 was rejected outright by the committee, and that we would entertain additional conversation on the other 5 during the board meeting. So I think in a way we've tried to reduce that down. The board will have the full minutes that I will write up for this meeting, so they can have that. But I think this is a way to try and get to a statement on all these items, at least with some, backup in terms of what we discussed. And 13, 14, 17, 04, 7, and 9. Yes. Okay, are we all in agreement with that? All right. With that, then, I thank you, and I call the meeting to a close, and we'll hopefully see you next week.